All right, let's try a little thought experiment. You ever wonder how good we actually are at predicting the future? Well, today we're going to jump in a time machine, go back more than 15 years, and look at a major forecast to see just how well it predicted, well, our world, the one we're living in right now. So yeah, let's pull on that thread and see where it takes us. Okay, so no easing into it. We're jumping straight into the deep end. This quote here, it's a snapshot of the world from January 2026. I mean, just read it. It's complicated, it's messy, you've got multiple countries, proxy forces, mercenaries, all tangled up in a conflict that most of us probably haven't even heard of. It's a perfect, almost textbook example of just how chaotic our world is today. So the big question is, how on earth did we get here? Right? How did we end up in a world where war looks like this? This tangled mess of countries and private armies all fighting with brand new, easy-to-get technology. It can feel pretty confusing, honestly. But what if I told you that someone basically drew a map of this world, all the way back in 2008? Seriously, the clues to understanding what's happening right now were laid out for us in this incredible attempt to chart the future. So here it is. We're talking about a report called Global Trends 2025. It was put together by the U.S. National Intelligence Council. And look, the goal here wasn't to be some kind of magic crystal ball. It was about stimulating some serious strategic thinking, trying to spot the huge global trends that were going to shape the world for the next couple of decades. And they did not pull any punches. I mean, they started with a bang. Right there in the summary, they dropped this bombshell prediction. They weren't talking about little tweaks here and there. They were talking about a complete, fundamental overhaul of the entire global system. So, what exactly did they see on the horizon? First up, and this is probably the most important one, was the whole structure of global power. The report basically said, hey, that world dominated by one single superpower, that's ending. They saw a massive shift coming towards something totally new. And the key word they used was multipolar. The idea was that by 2025, it wouldn't be a unipolar world, led by just the US. And it wouldn't be a bipolar world like the US and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Nope. They argued that power was going to be spread out, distributed among a bunch of different major players. So here's where it gets really interesting, how they described this shift. They talked about this historic transfer of wealth, moving from the West to the East. But it wasn't just about money. It was about the whole model, the whole system. The idea that liberal democracy was the only game in town was being challenged by this rise of state capitalism, the kind you see in places like China and Russia. It was a fundamental challenge to the way things were. And they didn't just talk in generalities. The report got specific about who these new big players would be. It pointed right at the BRIC nations. That's Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And just look at that projection, that one day their collective economic power would actually match the original G7. That's huge. And of all of them, it singled out China as being the one country that would have more impact on the world than any other. Okay, so it makes sense, right? When the whole world order shifts, the way conflicts happen is going to shift too. And the report didn't just predict who would have the power, but it also took a hard look at how that power might get used by everyone. And this is crucial. The forecasters saw that we were moving past just traditional country versus country wars. They pointed to things like fights over resources, think energy and water. They talked about the growing power of groups outside of governments, criminal networks, tribal groups, and they warned about the spread of dangerous technologies. I mean, does any of that sound familiar? And boom, just like that, we're back in 2026. Look at this. This isn't some high-level general talking about billion-dollar fighter jets. This is a real-world discussion about whether cheap, off-the-shelf drones could replace mortars for troops on the ground. This is exactly what diffusion of dangerous technologies looks like in real life. It's playing out right in front of our eyes, just like they said it would. But look, it's not all about geopolitics and conflict. One of the most powerful forces shaping our world, maybe the most predictable one, is just people. How many of us there are, how old we are, where we live, and where we're moving to. The report really dug into these demographic destinies. And what they found was a world getting pulled in completely opposite directions. On one side, you've got the developed world, Europe, Japan, with aging, even shrinking populations. That creates a huge economic strain. But on the other side, you've got this youth bulge in what they called an arc of instability, from Africa to South Asia, which creates a whole different set of pressures. Now, throw in a massive move to cities and the incredible explosion of a global middle class. I mean, that's a recipe for some serious dramatic social change. And then, there's this number, 200 million. That's the potential number of people who could be permanently displaced by climate change. And get this wasn't some wild guess from the French. This was a core part of the forecast, even back in 2008. They saw a massive human tide coming that would literally reshape politics and borders. Okay, so that was the map drawn back in 2008. Now for the moment of truth. Let's hold that map up to the world we see around us today, and let's check how well it actually lines up. This is the reality check. All right, let's take a look at this online discussion from 2026. It's talking about this small breakaway region called Transnistria, and basically how the shifting power dynamics in Europe are creating a lot of instability right on the edge of a major power's influence. And here's the direct link back to that 2008 report. It explicitly warned that these new multipolar systems are usually more unstable. Why? Well, because there's no single cop on the beat enforcing the rules. Alliances are always changing, and the new big players are way more willing to stir things up in their own neighborhoods. So the chaos we see in places like Moldova, it's not a surprise. It's a predicted feature of this new world. Okay, let's circle back to that very first quote we saw, the one about the conflict brewing around Sudan. Just look at the cast of characters involved. Mercenaries from South Sudan and even Colombia, fighting alongside a local paramilitary group. This is not your grandfather's army. It's a multinational crew of fighters for hire. And this is a perfect, even if it's kind of a chilling, example of that prediction about non-state actors coming true. The rise of these private military companies, these mercenary groups that just operate across borders. It's become a defining feature of modern conflict. And they saw it coming more than 15 years ago. So after seeing all this, you might be thinking, okay, so what? Why does it even matter that we're looking back at some old forecast? Well, I think there are some really crucial lessons to take away from this. Look, at the end of the day, the Global Trends 2025 report wasn't perfect. Of course not. It didn't predict specific election results or the exact date a conflict would start. But what it did was absolutely nail the big picture. It saw this less stable, multipolar world coming from a mile away. It correctly pointed to the big engines of that change, shifting money, new tech, and the movement of people. And that's the big takeaway, right? Strategic foresight isn't about being a psychic. It's about understanding the deep, powerful currents that are going to end up shaping the headlines we read tomorrow. And that really leaves us with one last, pretty challenging question. If the world of 2025 was pretty much visible from way back in 2008, if you just knew where to look, then what about now? Standing right here today, what are the deep currents that we can see? What does the map of, say, 2045 look like? And maybe more importantly, what are we doing now to get ready for it?